So in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about the importance of respiration, and this will be the first lesson in our chapter on respiration in general. Now, keep in mind that this unit is called animal systems, and so we're talking about respiration. We're going to be specifically talking about the types of respiration and respiratory structures that we would find in animals. Um, but it's also important to think about, beyond human respiration and to keep in mind that there are a variety of respiratory structures that exist because animals are varied. So the first thing I'm going to do is get you to think about when you think about respiration, what comes to mind? And I'm going to suggest that most of you will think about the idea that we need to take in oxygen and we need to expel carbon dioxide. And then that's a really important part of respiration. But I'm also going to guess that if you really dug deep, you would get to the next piece, which is that the purpose of respiration. I mean, respiration is the breathing in and breathing out, but the purpose of doing that is to be able to take in oxygen so that our cells can be supplied with oxygen and also to remove that carbon dioxide, right? So, we have this sort of macroscopic idea and then this sort of microscopic idea of respiration. And that's what we're going to explore. So I just want to take a look at this for a minute. I'm hoping you're recognizing what this structure is. It's a red blood cell. And so presumably what we're looking at is over here, this is lung tissue. Air being taken into the lung, and over here, this is some part of your circulatory system where red blood cells exist. And our oxygen is strongly attracted to the red blood cells, and our carbon dioxide, which is in high supply and high concentration on our red blood cells, is going to want to move out and out of our body through our respiratory system. And that's, of course, just again talking about the human respiratory system. But remember that respiratory surfaces in general are going to want to exchange those gases. And in fact, you'll be doing a worksheet today that will ask you to explore that a little bit more. Okay, so there are a few different components of respiration. So, first of all, what we're going to talk about is straight up breathing. Okay, that's that's the first stage. And that's simply just physically using our body to get air into our body and then getting rid of it afterwards. And so there's some special words for that we use in science. The special sciencey word for breathing in is inspiration. And the special fancy science word for breathing out is expiration. And so, I really liked this animation because it sort of shows how, well, why is this character breathing heavily? Well, it looks like he's hiding behind a tree trunk and maybe trying to and running away from something. And so we've evolved, our animal body has evolved to breathe more heavily in times of stress. And part of the reason for that evolutionary modification is just, when we are stressed out, we need more energy. And in order to produce more energy, we're going to need to take in more oxygen so that our cells can burn it to produce that energy. Burn sugar, that is. Okay, so now the next phase of respiration I'm going to hold off on because I still want to talk about just breathing in general. And there are a few structures here that need to be highlighted. I'm hoping you're noticing this muscular flap that's beneath the rib cage. And I'm also hoping that you know what it's called. It is the diaphragm. And so basically that's what it is. It's a big sheet of muscle that's right underneath the lungs. It sort of divides the thoracic cavity with the abdominal cavity. And you'll notice hopefully in this picture, and I have another animation coming up in a second here, but when you inhale, the rib cage expands, your diaphragm contracts, or the muscles kind of squeeze together and move down, right? So, maybe just take a minute to breathe in feel that rib cage expand, but know also that your diaphragm is going to have to move down because you need to create extra space in your chest cavity to accommodate the extra air coming in. So the only way that happens is if that diaphragm moves down. And so conversely, when you exhale, when you uh, get rid of all that extra air, you're losing lung volume, right? You're expelling that air. That allows your rib cage to relax, and your diaphragm kind of moves up again because you need to kind of equilibrate the pressure in your chest cavity. So here's another picture animation that I really liked because it sort of uses those bluish white dots to represent air going in and out, and just notice that as your lung volume increases, you need to make space in your chest cavity so the diaphragm moves down. Now, another point that's worth making is that, well, how does our body know how to breathe? We breathe when we sleep, even, right? That's not involuntary, although we can, choose to breathe more heavily if we wanted to, but it's an automatic process for us that's guided by our nervous system and our brain specifically detecting high concentrations of CO2 in our blood. And our brain seeing that is saying, oh wow, if a lot of CO2 is attached to our red blood cells, that means there's not a lot of oxygen. We better get more oxygen in. And so that's sort of how that works. Okay, so next stage, we've breathed in, we've inhaled that air, taken it into our lungs. The next phase I'm hoping that I'm hinting with these pictures, the next phase of respiration is gas exchange, right? So once the air reaches the surfaces of our lungs, and we're going to talk about the structure, then there needs to be some kind of gas exchange happening. And this is true not only of we think about mammals like humans, etc., but other organisms as well. There still needs to be a process of gas exchange happening between the external environment and the internal environment. Okay, so over here we have, would be like the external environment, so the inside of your lung, say for instance, and this would be your internal environment, okay, which would be like your blood vessel, and you can see there's that gas exchange happening with your red blood cells. Right now, I'll be really impressed if you remember the name of this structure. It's a cross section of a part of the human lung that we're going to talk about in a very shortly in another screencast. And what you see here is, air that's been inspired moving across from the external environment crossing into the body's internal environment. So that's really all that gas exchange is. The second stage, called external respiration, is just the diffusion of gases between the external environment, the outside, and your respiratory membranes into the bloodstream. Pretty much that's it. Okay, so now this is really worth mentioning, and I'm going to use the example of a worm, even though, worm is, as an invertebrate, not really closely related to us, though that's all really just relative, I guess. I don't know if you've ever noticed that worms, when it gets rainy out, tend to move towards the sidewalk because there's too much water there. And then they get on the sidewalk, and all of a sudden the rain's gone, and they dry out, and they can't get to soil fast enough, right? Well, the surface of their skin is their respiratory membrane. So all of this type of exchange has to be happening within the worm as well. So when its skin dries out, that's its respiratory membrane, then it's kind of in trouble because in order for that oxygen to pass through that membrane, it has to be in a liquid, and usually that liquid is water. So if your membranes are not moist, then that's not going to be able to happen. And in grade 12 biology, we'll talk a little bit more about the biochemistry of why that happens. But, we see that with other organisms like frogs. Frogs have need to have a wet, moist outer skin because their lungs are primitive. But even the lungs themselves need to be moist, right? So We worry about that with people who are exposed, are in fires with their breathing in hot air smoke and that damaging their lung membrane so that they can't efficiently exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay, so next we have internal respiration. And internal respiration is, I think, also fairly straightforward. Now we're just, we've inspired air containing oxygen. That oxygen has moved from our lungs into our bloodstream, but now we're talking about um, that oxygen moving into the actual target cells that need the oxygen. So here's, a little diagram that I found that I thought might be helpful. So here we're talking about, would be your bloodstream, with your blood cells contained in it, carrying the hemoglobin, aiding in carrying that oxygen, and it travels to the target cell area or target tissue, where it kind of detaches from your red blood cell, from the hemoglobin, moves into that interstitial fluid or that extracellular fluid, and then across the cell membrane and into the cell. So that's all internal respiration is. It's just the movement of gases to and from the circulatory system to target tissues. Next, we have cellular respiration. And when we talk about respiration, students usually, it takes a little bit of prodding to get you to think about cellular respiration as being a part of respiration as a whole. So I'm going to highlight this for you. First of all, it takes place in the mitochondria. Year after year, we talk about this organelle called the mitochondria found in the cell that is responsible for, it's the powerhouse of the cell and makes energy for the cell. Well, how does it do that? Well, it does it via the process of cellular respiration. And in fact, in grade 12 biology, this becomes essentially its own unit where we talk about the nitty-gritty details of cellular respiration. So let me expand on that. Our cells, we know that they need oxygen, and we know that they need glucose. So the oxygen they're getting from the respiratory system, from respiration, and the glucose, well, where are they getting that from? They're getting it from digestion, right? So why do we need glucose and oxygen? We need them because that is our body's way of making energy. So during cellular respiration, we're taking glucose and combining it with the oxygen from respiration. And what that does for us is the important part is the energy, right? The energy that we're making for our body in order to help us to perform just simple tasks. And it just so happens that CO2 that we've been talking about in this lesson is a byproduct, right? We just make it as a function of the fact that, we need to break down glucose. And the water, if you've breathed out, if you've expired on a very cold day, that you see that steam coming out. Well, that steam in large part is just water vapor. So water is also another waste product of cellular respiration, right? So this is really our end game. This is what we want. We want to be able to take in oxygen during respiration for the purpose of supplying it as a reactant along with glucose in the process of cellular respiration. That is the key. That is our end game here. Okay, so some other little tidbits to tie things together. We know that the larger the organism, the more O2 it requires, right? And you might be thinking, well, that makes sense, right? But why does it make sense? I'm hoping that what you thought about was that, well, larger organism, more energy needed, right? Or larger organism, more cells, right? And so, in order to get enough oxygen in fast enough, we need to have structures in place to maximize surface area. And you're going to be doing a worksheet very shortly that will help you to examine various respiratory surfaces of different sort of groups of organisms to see how their structures maximize surface area. And a lot of the structural components will relate to the complexity of the organism and the size of the organism. But just a little, to help you, if that's a little bit confusing, I thought, well, let's create a visual. And I didn't create the visual, I just inserted it. But we're going to say here that in all three of these cells, and these are the cells I'm going to compare, these nuclei are the same size, but what is different is the rest of the cell, right? So the rest of the nucleus remains the same size, but the cell, as it grows, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This is actually why cells need to divide. They divide because, well, let's say I was the oxygen molecule that needed to get in to find the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is like way over here or whatever, right? That's not super efficient. So, humans can't be made of a single cell for a whole host of reasons. One of which is the fact that, having a single cell is less efficient in terms of surface area, getting materials in and out compared to having like many, many small cells. Let me explain that a little bit more. Here's a nice little infographic for you. So, here's the scenario where humans are made of one whole cell, and here's the scenario where humans are made up of millions of little cells, right? In this case, it's not a million, but the idea is the same. You can see that the volume is the same, right? They both occupy the same amount of three-dimensional space, but the surface area on this cube that I'm pointing at right here is much, much greater. So if I'm an oxygen molecule, again, trying to diffuse in to efficiently undergo cellular respiration along with glucose, then I can attack each individual cell and get to the middle part of it, that section of it, much faster because I can kind of approach that cell on all sides, right? Whereas to get from, outside here all the way maybe to the middle of this might not be as efficient. Hence the importance of surface area and the surface area to volume ratio. So that's all for this first screencast in our section on the importance of respiration. I want you to follow this up with the worksheet that I've been speaking about respiratory surfaces, and just explore what that means for organisms aside from humans and other mammals. All right, so that's it. If you struggle with any aspect of this first screencast today, then please visit our Zoom meeting. I'll be happy to help you out to clarify. Or if you just want to hang out and give me an update on how you're doing, that would be great too.